Thank you for joining us today for this presentation of Be Red Cross Ready. My name is Diana Rawls. I'm a presenter from the American Red Cross, really focused on preparedness and making sure that our communities are ready in the event of an emergency. So we all know that Red Cross is active during hurricanes and all of these kind of larger emergencies, but a lot of folks don't know that the Red Cross also is focused on helping people be prepared for emergencies, as well as making sure that people are assisted during times of maybe smaller emergencies that we wouldn't think of. So for instance, if your home burns down, that's an event that the Red Cross would be able to help out with. So today we're going to be specifically speaking about extreme heat as a local hazard. And I know that in a lot of our communities, especially recently, these past couple of days have been hot. So it's especially timely right now in summer. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So disasters are things that are oftentimes these natural events that overwhelm normal response systems. They can cause injury and they can cause damage to property and destroy it potentially. They can happen in any community and they often happen without warning. For instance, a hurricane, we have lots of warning in advance for. However, something like an earthquake, we wouldn't have any really advance notice for that. Next slide. So here in Massachusetts, which hazards do we face? Well, we face home fire because that happens everywhere. Some other hazards that we would face everywhere would include floods, thunderstorms, and winter storms. But what else happens here in Massachusetts? Well, we also can experience tornadoes, especially out in the western part of the state, hurricanes in the eastern part of the state, extreme heat during our summers, and then often at times we could also be at risk of flooding, which I believe I've said already. Next slide. And so we really want to emphasize that during those first 3 days that response systems might be overwhelmed, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to reach every individual who needs assistance during that time. And so by being prepared, you can help increase your resiliency, but also help out those first responders to know that, hey, this person has themselves taken care of for the first 3 days. We don't have to respond to that emergently. And it reserves the systems for those folks who haven't been able to prepare. So because those response systems are overwhelmed, we can't count on receiving help right away. And so preparing means including yourself, your household, neighbors, and older adults in your plan to make sure that they are all ready in the event of an emergency. Next slide. And so each of us can prepare, and it helps us to stay safe. It helps us adapt to challenges, and it helps us recover quickly. One of the things that I know that this can really help me out with is it helps me feel confident. That when I know that, oh, this bad thing might be coming, I know that I'm already prepared. I know that I know what to do during that event to stay safe. And I know that because I've been sharing this information with people around me, with my loved ones, they also are going to be safe in case of an emergency. Next slide. And so there are 3 steps that we really emphasize with Be Red Cross Ready. And so those 3 steps: get a kit, make a plan, and be informed. And we're going to go into more depth with each of these. Can we have the next slide? So get a kit. This is when we talk about an emergency preparedness kit. And I really want that to, in your mind, kind of start triggering thoughts of what would I need for 3 days if I couldn't be in my home. So 2 weeks, if possible, is great, but that's not going to be your mobile go bag kit. That's really only going to have the space for your 3 days worth of equipment. So supplies for each member of your household. So when we're talking about those supplies, we're talking about a gallon of water for each individual per day. Supplies for each member of your household, including medications that they might need, but also clothing. In the event of an emergency, you want to be able to have that change of clothes, and you want it to be seasonal. And so I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but you want to revisit this kit and keep building on it and keep adding things to it. And so every 6 months, I go back in and make sure the clothes in my kit are seasonal as well. Jonathan, do you have any things that you would throw into your kit? A lot of water. Mm-hmm. Batteries and flashlight are a really great example. So we would want to have extra batteries for anything that's going to take batteries. We'd want some food, but we wouldn't necessarily want a banana or an orange. We'd want something that's non-perishable. So cans especially are good for this, especially cans that have the pop tops instead of the crank tops. That'll help us out a lot to not have to have another piece of equipment in our preparedness kit. And then as well, we want to have hygiene items. If you can't go back into your home for 3 days, you want to have toothbrush and soap and those sorts of things to help you in the event of an emergency. And then finally, I also have a book in my kit, just something for me to do to kind of fill up some of the time that I'm going to have if I can't be at my home. Finally, last thing that I really like to emphasize here that most people don't think about is either a hand crank or battery-powered radio. If your cell phone dies, then that radio is really going to be your communication line to the authorities and any other groups that are going to be trying to contact you. So that radio is really an important part of your kit. Next slide. Gather the essentials, so exactly what we were just talking about, medications, a first aid kit, that radio, flashlight, needs of every household member, and exactly like I was saying, to keep it fresh. Could we have the next slide? So in the customization of your kit, I've talked a little bit about how I customize mine, but one thing that I have in my kit that is custom for my family is I have a little bit of cat food, a little bit of litter, and a little bit of toys just to keep my kittens happy. Because if there's enough time for me to grab my emergency preparedness kit and get out, there's going to be time for me to get my cats and get out. And that's also an important part of my kind of well-being during that event, is to know that all members of my family, including my pets, are safe. Items that bring you comfort when stressed, so books, playing cards, photos, games. And then you also want to customize your kit based on disasters common to your location. And so here in Massachusetts, we can experience flooding. And so we might also want to consider a change of shoes or kind of boots to go along with that, just in case that's the need. Next. You can also have a kit for everywhere. At work, I have a kit for myself that especially includes walking shoes. A lot of times when we are in these professional settings, it isn't the same wardrobe that we would want to have during an emergency. You also want to have food and water because you're spending about half of your time that you're awake at work in a normal circumstance. So we want to also be sure that we're prepared there. And then for a vehicle, you want the same sorts of supplies as you would in your regular kit, but you also would want some vehicle-specific things like flares and jumper cables. And then among seasonal supplies, I include kitty litter or sand in my vehicle just so that I can get out in case I lose traction under my wheels in snow. So just a couple of things in your vehicle to help you be prepared as well. A blanket is always a great idea. You never know when you're going to get stuck somewhere and need to just kind of stay warm and feel a little bit more comfy. Next. Second step is going to be make a plan. And so things that you need to consider are those likely disasters. We've talked about some of them that are going to be more relevant in Massachusetts, but in various locations, there might be different hazards. And even if you are in one place, you might want to consider how close you are to a river or a stream in the event of a flood, because even that location is going to change your vulnerability to that disaster. You want to consider household members who travel, and in the event that they are traveling when an event occurs, how are you going to stay in contact with them? Household members with access or functional needs, making sure that you have a plan for those folks in advance of the emergency happening. And then finally, like I mentioned before, pets or service animals. If you have to evacuate, do you have places to evacuate that you know that you can take your pets or animals? Next. So including the right details. When you're making this plan, you need to know how to evacuate. What are the evacuation routes out of your neighborhood? You want to know at least 2 in case one of them gets blocked. Where to meet, you want to have a couple of meeting locations, one just outside of your home that we'll talk about further in the home fire section, and then one outside of your neighborhood that everyone in your family knows in the event that you have to evacuate your neighborhood and can't get in contact with all members of your family. How you're going to communicate. We've all experienced during parades or other kinds of large gatherings where the cell phone service starts getting spotty. And so you don't want to rely entirely on that cell phone as your means of communication. And one way that you can really improve your communication ability using that cell phone is going to be having an out-of-area contact. So one of the ways that cell phones works is it pings up to the tower, it connects it, and then it pings it back down to the phone. If you're pinging to the same tower and then back down, that's going to be more difficult to connect than if you're pinging that tower and it's sending it halfway across the country, and then that person is able to kind of act as a common communication source for you and anyone in that area that has also been affected. So for instance, myself and my husband know that my in-laws, we can both get in contact with them and they're able to connect us in the event of an emergency. Important records, things that are going to be really difficult to replace in the event of an emergency. You want to have a plan for having copies of those, but also if you need to send copies of those to family members to be able to retrieve later, that is also a good part of your plan to include. Where you'll stay in the event of an evacuation. Are you going to have family members that you can stay with? Are you going to be able to get a hotel? Are you going to be relying on common sheltering? And if you are going to have to be relying on congregate sheltering, understanding what that looks like in advance. And then finally, understanding how to shelter in place and making sure that you have all the materials to shelter in place. And a mobile go kit that you might have in your home could also be your shelter in place kit for 3 days if necessary. And then finally, practicing your plan. If everyone in your family has some idea of the plan but hasn't ever practiced it, then it's going to start falling apart when the stress and tension comes. So you really want to practice it. You want it to be kind of that second nature, okay, everyone defaults into this plan that we're all acting on. And so the practicing is especially important. And so when I check my preparedness kit, I also am making sure that all the members of my household are also practicing that plan, that we all understand it the same way. Next. Communication after a disaster. So this is a emergency contact card. You can get this from the American Red Cross. The Safe and Well website is not where you would get it. You would actually go to Red Cross Preparedness, and they'll be able to kind of get you to a place that you can find this. You want to have at least one emergency contact memorized that you would also have on this card. That's in case you don't have this card, you don't have your phone, you still are able to get in contact with someone. But this card does cover police, fire, ambulance, as well as your emergency contact and some other people that you can add in case of emergency. And if you look at the bottom, and it's kind of small text, so it might be difficult to see, but there is an out-of-area contact person there, as well as the meeting place outside of your neighborhood, just so that everyone has that same information. You can make sure that everyone in your family has a version of this card. And if you want to print out this card, great. If you want to have an index card, that works just as well. The Safe and Well website that is listed here actually is a service that the American Red Cross provides. It connects people after disasters who have been separated from each other. And so if you happen to have this bad day come where you do need to reconnect with someone, Safe and Well is a service that's available to you. Next. Finally, be informed. Identify how you will get information about any incoming disasters. Are you going to potentially sign up for any sort of emergency alerts through your town? In Boston here, we have an emergency text alert that gets sent out that you can register for. And a lot of other municipalities have a similar system, either by text or email, that you will automatically get notified of any kind of emergencies that you need to be aware of. Understanding weather alerts, the difference between a watch and a warning, for instance, which we'll discuss in more detail. You want to know how to follow instructions for authorities, what shelter in place means, and what evacuation means for your community. And then knowing your neighbors. It seems silly to kind of include this in this Be Informed section, but when that bad day comes, my best friend in Indiana isn't going to be the person who I'm recovering with, who can help me kind of get steps ahead to get my life kind of sorted in order. My neighbors are going to be the ones that I'm going to be able to say, hey, I have all of this food. Does anyone have sterno fire so that we can actually heat it up? And so you want to know your neighbors, both so that you understand what vulnerabilities they might have, but also so that you can work together when that bad day comes. And then know what to do when traveling. There's a little cell phone here that has the emergency app from the American Red Cross pulled up, and that's emergency with an exclamation point. We're going to discuss it just a little bit more, but I really like it because I can put in a lot of different locations, and that way I'll get the emergency alerts for all of these locations that my loved ones are in, but also where I'm traveling, so that I don't have to do 20 minutes of legwork to try and figure out, okay, what vulnerabilities do they have? I just know that the emergency app is going to let me know if there's anything urgent coming up that I need to be aware of. Next. And so finally, talking about emotional health after a disaster. Disasters are obviously stressful, and it's important to know how you handle stress, but how other members of your family will also handle stress. If you're the sort of person that really draws inward, you need to know that so that you can also start preparing for, okay, how am I going to start addressing that? Taking steps to help manage your stress and minimize its lasting effects are really important. And so one of the things that I would recommend is a technique called box breathing. And it's a technique that paramedics and first responders use to kind of physiologically hotwire their brains. And so what it is you breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold for 4 seconds, you exhale for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, and then you breathe in. And it's a way of basically telling your brain, hey, shut down fight or flight mode, let's calm down. And you can do it as many times as you need until you start feeling that kind of stress and tension ease away. And then finally, get help when you need it. Disasters are stressful, and there's nothing wrong with feeling stressed or over emotional in the event of a disaster. There really isn't an over emotional. It's one of the most stressful moments that anyone is going to experience in their life. And so there's no shame in getting help. The Red Cross provides disaster mental health assistance, and there is a disaster distress hotline that we'll show you in just a moment that you can also use in the event of an emergency. Next. And then helping children cope. Just like grown-ups are going to be stressed out, these kiddos are going to be stressed out. They really rely on this routine, and anything that is going to disrupt that routine is going to be stressful. Evacuation, injury, or death are all really big, heavy topics that we need to be able to both explain to the kiddos and say, this is what's happening at whatever level that they're able to understand it, but also be able to help support them after that disaster strikes. It's fairly common for children to regress in the event of an extreme stress trigger like this. And so while it's frustrating, it's not something that we need to be punishing. It's just a stress reaction. They can't control it either. And so like I was talking about, being prepared can help those kiddos build confidence before that disaster strikes. And so it's really good to have these conversations with your kiddos at whatever level that they're able to understand. Next. And so tools, we talked about the emergency contact card. I discussed the Safe and Well website. And then the Red Cross app's available for free from the App or Play Store. On the left, you can see the icon for our first aid app. And so if you haven't been able to get the first aid training class yet and really feel like you want to have just a resource, that's something that you can download on your phone. The emergency app icon is on the right. That's the one I was discussing earlier, where you can program in multiple locations and have those kind of ping to your phone whenever something happens emergently. Next. And so we have a checklist. And this is just to help you understand where you are in your preparedness process. So you already have one checkbox for, I know what disasters are most likely in my area. Next checkbox, I have a household disaster plan and have practiced using it. And you want to make sure that, again, everyone in your household knows that plan and has practiced using it, including your kiddos, including anyone with access and functional needs. I have a disaster preparedness kit, and this is something that you can build over time. I bet a lot of the things that I described are things that you already have in your home. It would just take a matter of putting it all in one place. And so start out with what you have and start out with what you can afford and build it over time. This is something that you're going to have an ongoing relationship with, and as you understand what you would want in a time of disaster, you'll be able to continue fleshing it out. At least one member of my household is trained in CPR or first aid, and that's a class that the Red Cross offers. You can still get this in COVID times. We haven't stopped training people in CPR and first aid. It just might be a slightly different format than our conventional in-person classes. Next. And so our next module is home fires, but Jonathan, as our representative of the public, I would love if you had any questions that you felt comfortable sharing that we could try and answer at this point. About general preparedness or home fires. Yes, so there is a system that a lot of places will use that will kind of proactively send out some emergency notifications. I can say that right now I don't believe either of my phones has it. So if you don't have that, then the municipality is a way of getting really specific, but also really focused on what you are looking for. So you can find that on the Red Cross website, especially if you search Be Red Cross Ready. They will go ahead and start you off on kind of a website that'll walk you through each step of this plan. Those were great questions. Thank you. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I really appreciate it. So could we have the next slide? This is a breakdown of home fire causes and home fire deaths. And so you can see that most home fires in the US are started as kitchen fires. Those fires account for about a fifth of the deaths. We also have electrical misuse and malfunctioning equipment. Those account for about 25% of fires and about 35% of deaths between both causes. And then finally, smoking deaths cause about 5% of fires, but cause about 22% of deaths, actually being the most lethal cause of a fire. And we'll discuss each of these in a little bit more detail. Can we have the next slide? And so to reduce fire risk in your home, we're going to start out in the kitchen since that's where most fires start. We want to stay in the kitchen while we're cooking, never leave anything burning unattended, and then installing fire extinguishers. In your kitchen, you'll want to consider especially K fire extinguishers. They're designed to put out oil fires where most fire extinguishers may not. And then finally, just the kind of high level, keep an eye on what you fry. If you have something on heat, stay with it, keep an eye on it. That way we can just make sure that things aren't getting a little out of control while we aren't supervising. Next. This reducing fire risk in your home for electronics. This top box, you can see 3 feet from heat. And so that's referring to keeping any sort of textiles, fabric, anything flammable 3 feet away from a heat source. I used to toss my blanket up over my steam radiator and it was warm and cozy and I loved it. And that is a fire hazard I've learned, and so I don't do that anymore. But you also want to be sure that you're doing the same thing with any sort of heat generators, any sort of space heaters, fireplaces, anything like that. You want to have textiles about 3 feet away from them. Plug appliances directly into wall outlets rather than using extension cords or those extender strips. Avoid overloading outlets, especially if you have these kind of high-powered appliances plugged into them. You want to make sure that you're plugging them directly into the wall, but also you aren't putting too many on a single outlet. And then making sure that electrical cords are used safely, that we aren't daisy chaining things, for instance, in an extension cord to a strip to this. You want to be sure that if you're extending that outlet, you only have the one connector in between. Next slide. And then smoking, obviously we would recommend never smoking in bed or when drowsy. That's actually part of why these smoking deaths are so lethal, is your mattress is one of the most flammable items in your home. And so when that ash or spark will fall onto the bed, it will catch it quickly and you won't wake up as quickly as it will become dangerous. Never smoke where medical oxygen is used, and then always properly extinguish your cigarettes. And then finally, keep matches and lighters away from kids. Make sure that they understand that fire is dangerous. A lot of us, I'm sure when we were younger, were little firebugs, but we want to make sure that our kiddos understand why that's dangerous, why adults always have to be around in the event of fire being used. Next. So another way that you can reduce your risk is actually installing smoke alarms. Smoke alarms on even just one smoke alarm working in your home reduces your home fire risk of death by about 50%. So you ideally want to have them installed on every floor, inside and outside of sleeping areas. This says test them every month. I test it every 6 months when I check my preparedness kit. And so I'm actually timing that up with daylight savings time. So I have that visual reminder of the clock to say, oh, I need to change that, and here are all of my other activities that I do at the same time. Maintain them properly, make sure they aren't getting too dusty, you aren't painting over them, you aren't taking them down and putting them in a drawer. They need to be up and installed to be working and protecting you and your family. After 10 years, the materials inside of them corrode and degrade over time, and 10 years really is the upper end of that alarm's functionality. So even if that alarm looks fine, still beeps, and it's 15 years old, get a replacement for that alarm. And then don't disable your alarms. If you're like me and you've set many smoke alarms off in the kitchen, it might be tempting to take that alarm down. But what I would really recommend is, instead of taking that down and putting it in a drawer and forgetting about it, take it down and figure out a place in your home that it won't be a nuisance alarm. Find a place that you really would appreciate more coverage, like a bedroom, and install it there. We always, with the Red Cross, recommend to not install alarms near kitchens or bathrooms or any place that's going to generate a lot of steam, smoke, particulates that are going to set off that alarm and make it a nuisance. So really, as long as they're in places that are going to protect you and your family members, we want them to stay there. Next. So in the event of a fire, you have less than 2 minutes to get out safely. And that isn't because of the heat, that isn't because of the fire itself, that's actually because of the smoke. Smoke inhalation is the leading cause of home fire death. And so that 2 minutes really is based on that smoke and the density that it's going to build as time goes on. So get out and stay out is the very first thing. You want to have a safe escape route. If there's smoke, get low. You don't want to be walking high up and trying to breathe in all of that smoke. So we recommend crawling as much as you can. If there's harmful debris on the ground, then avoid that. But you really want to minimize how much smoke you're inhaling. Meet at the designated safe meeting place. I mentioned this earlier, that a designated safe meeting place outside of your home in the event of home fire is going to be needed. And then call 911 once you're safe. That's going to be outside of the home, not inside of it. Asking a neighbor for a phone or something else to call 911 is the best move there. Next slide. So plan escape routes. You can see here a home fire escape map, and it shows 2 routes out of every room. The door is the first escape path, and then these windows are the second escape path. And so if you're on the first floor, great, windows are a perfect escape path. If you're on the second floor, a window might not be as ideal of an escape path. So you want to have a plan for those second story rooms. Escape ladders for second floors might be an option that you want to consider. You also want to keep escape routes clutter-free. You don't want to be tripping over these toys or clothes or whichever might be in the way in the event of an emergency. Next slide. And so here you can see this oak tree in front of neighbor's house is going to be this family's designated meeting place. And that's really an ideal designated meeting place because it's a safe distance from the home. You're no longer at risk from the heat or exposure of the fire. It's a specific fixed location, and everyone in your family needs to understand that this is the oak tree, which is part of why you practice, to make sure that, oh, I thought you meant the oak tree 3 doors down, and you guys can kind of correct that before that bad day comes. You want it to be in front of the home so that the firefighters, when they arrive, are able to connect with someone to say, okay, so who's in your family, who's represented here at your designated safe meeting place, and who's unaccounted for. Because that who's unaccounted for is going to determine whether they go into that burning building. And so having a really strong plan for this will also help us to be able to reduce the risk that we're exposing firefighters to as well. And then call 911 once safe at that designated meeting place. Next. You want to make sure that your plan works for everyone, so especially folks with access and functional needs, little kids, and any sort of pets that might not be able to do this plan independently within 2 minutes. And so if you have a little 2-year-old son that requires assistance to evacuate, making a plan for who's going to be responsible for that kiddo. At the bottom here, you can see a link for ILRU, and that actually is a national program that puts Centers for Independent Living in communities. What Centers for Independent Living do is they really work to build plans with individuals who are living with disabilities independently in the community, and disaster preparedness is one of the things that they're able to help out with. And so if you find that you have an access and functional need and aren't sure how to address it during this kind of event, ILRU and the Centers for Independent Living are a great resource. Next. Finally, practice your home fire escape plan. I know I've said it again and again and again, but this is the one that I really want you to practice. This is the one that if you have no other time for anything else, creating a home fire escape plan and making sure that all the members of your family know. Making sure that everyone is getting out within that 2-minute window, and making sure that there isn't kind of that hesitation of, oh no, I need to go back in for this, and this thing. That'll also help kind of refresh for your kiddos or anyone else that needs that refresher of, this is how much time 2 minutes really is, because it sounds so much longer than when you're trying to grab up everything in your home to get out. So that 2 minutes, I also want to emphasize, is not the time to grab your preparedness kit. That is the time to get out and stay out as quickly as you possibly can. Next. So preparing children, the dangers of fire, making sure they understand what that smoke alarm sounds like. That's a big, scary sound if you don't know what it is. And if you hear it and don't know what that is, then it's not necessarily going to trigger that this is an emergency response that it needs to. How to open windows and use escape ladders. If that's going to be your second means of exit out of a window, you want to be sure that your kiddos both can lift that window themselves, but also that they know how to unlock it and use any other equipment. How to meet at your designated safe meeting place, and how to call 911 from a safe place outside of the home. Another thing that I want to make sure that we are teaching our kiddos is that firefighters are there to help. They can be really scary if they're coming up and you don't know what they're there for or what's going on. They have a big helmet, they have a big jacket, and they're very imposing figures. So we want to make sure that kiddos aren't hiding from firefighters especially. They know that those people are there to help them, and they know that in that event, they need to go to a firefighter if something bad is happening. Next. And then this is kind of your tips for how to get out of a closed room. Could we just click one more? So you want to look for smoke. Feel the door with the back of your hand specifically, and that way you're not burning the part of your hand that you're using the most. I never use this part of my hand to pick up things, to shake hands, or anything like that. And you want to feel the door first, because that door is going to be wood or whichever other material, and it's going to heat up more slowly than the handle of the door, which is metal. So if that door is hot, you don't need to touch that handle. If that door is cool, you can move on to the handle. If either is hot, do not open that door. So if you can't evacuate, you seal that door, you block any sort of air vents, and using blankets, towels, whatever you have at your disposal, and then call 911 and signal for help. So I would say open up that window, grab something white or fluorescent or bright colored, and start waving it and screaming, because that's one of the first things the firefighters are going to do, is once they understand that they don't have everyone evacuated from their home, they're going to walk around and see who might need help. And if you're out there making a commotion, that's going to be their person that, yes, we need to go up there and get that person. Next slide. And so being proactive and taking action to be prepared for a home fire, make that home fire escape plan, test your smoke alarms every month, and then practice your home fire escape plan with all the members of your family. Next. Any questions? Sounds good. So let's move on to extreme heat. And this is something that we especially want to talk about during the summers, because it's not something that necessarily can go away because we want it to. It's really a huge hazard, and it can cause a lot of injury and death. Could we have the next slide? Next. So extreme heat is defined as prolonged periods of high heat and humidity, especially because that humidity can drive the heat index up. It can be linked to warm overnight temperatures, especially where we do have that humidity, because it'll keep that heat level sustained overnight. And then the specific criteria will vary by region. Obviously, a heat wave in Arizona and a heat wave in Alaska are going to be different. And so you want to also understand the criteria for extreme heat in your area. Next. So extreme heat alerts. We have three kinds of alerts: a watch, advisory, and a warning. And the general rule of thumb is that a watch is going to be that something may happen, and a warning is that something is imminent. And so a flood watch, a flood may happen; a flood warning, a flood will happen. And that's going to be the same across the board with any sort of emergency. So could we have the next three buttons, I believe? And so for a watch, that means excessive heat is possible within the next 24 to 72 hours. You want to be ready. You want to monitor your updates. You want to be sure that all of these preparedness actions that I'm telling you about now, you're taking during that watch period. A heat advisory is that the forecasted heat index is above 100 degrees. You want to take precautions, but also start monitoring for potential heat illness, which we'll discuss some symptoms of. And then a warning: forecasted heat index of 105 degrees or higher. That's immediate precautions, watching out for serious heat illness, and we'll talk through some of the things that you can do to be prepared, but also what to do during an extreme heat wave. Next. So we talked a little bit about heat-related illness, and that's going to be three major things: heat cramps, heat stroke, and one other that we're going to see in a slide moment. But those are going to be really important because as your body heats up, certain systems are going to shut down. And so we really want to be sure that we're watching for those early signs and not letting it get to the point that it's extremely dangerous. Could we have the next slide? So planning and preparation, just like we were talking about the Be Red Cross Ready, get a kit, make a plan, be informed. We're going to enhance those kits with electrolyte water or drinks, potentially ice packs if you have them available. Tailoring your plan to identify any sort of cooling zones in your neighborhood or community if you don't have AC at home. And then preparing for power outages. In the summer, power outages can be more common because we're running more air conditioning units and there is a much higher draw on the power supply system. And so power outages, especially when you aren't going to be able to run that air conditioning, you want to be prepared for. And then in order to stay informed, monitor temperature and heat index and listen for any updates from authorities especially. Next. So staying safe during extreme heat, stay in air conditioning when possible, wear loose-fitting, lightweight clothes, just to make sure that you aren't kind of trapping all of that heat close to your body. Take cool baths and showers to kind of bring your temperature down, and then avoid using the stove and oven because those can just elevate the temperatures of your living space. Never leave anyone alone in a parked vehicle. We know that we've heard this a lot about kiddos, about pets, but really nobody should be in a parked vehicle that's a small, tiny glass enclosure, so it works like a greenhouse. It's just going to keep getting hotter and more humid in there the more time it's closed. Next. Step 2, hydrate. Drink more water than usual and avoid things that are going to dehydrate you, like alcohol, caffeine, especially salty foods that might dehydrate you as well. Next. And then number 3, limit outdoor activity, especially when we have those heat alerts, watches, and advisories, making sure that you're using sunscreen and wide-brimmed hats if you must go outside, and take any frequent breaks as you may need them. Avoid peak hours, especially around noon when that sun's heat is going to be the hottest, and the humidity is going to start rising and kind of trapping that heat. Next. For stay connected, monitor the weather, check on and assist others, make sure that you're keeping in contact with people who you might not be able to see or be in contact with as regular just because of the heat. You don't want to have someone kind of slip through the radar and be in a really dangerous position. Check on your pets. They don't have the same ways of communicating heat as we would, and so you want to be sure that they are staying safe in your care. And then avoid being alone. A lot of times being alone can be a risk factor with heat events, and so you don't want to be alone and just dealing with this oppressive heat if you can avoid it. Next. 5, stay aware. Be aware of heat illness, recognize the signs, and know how to treat. Avoid overheating, and that's going to be all of the things that we were discussing before are ways of avoiding overheating. Next. So to summarize, keep cool. Let's just click through each of these. There we go. Hydrate, limit outdoor activity, stay connected with your loved ones, and then stay aware, watching out for those signs of heat illness. Next. So for heat cramps, this is going to be your first sign of a heat-related illness. So that's going to be muscle pains or spasms. Arms, legs, or stomach are common places for heat cramps. I know that for me, I most frequently get them in my legs when I get heat cramps. So if you're getting those cramps, the first thing you want to do is start hydrating. Could we have the next? Heat exhaustion is the next step up. Could we just have the symptoms all listed out? Thank you. So symptoms of heat exhaustion: faintness or dizziness, heavy sweating, cool, pale, or clammy skin, elevated heart rate and breathing, nausea, and then weakness or fatigue. And this is going to affect the entire body, not just kind of those muscular systems like we were talking about with heat cramps. You're going to start feeling just kind of that general malaise, not good kind of feeling with heat exhaustion. Next. Heat stroke is the one that we really want to keep an eye out. This is where we can have permanent damage to the body. So heat stroke symptoms are going to be the throbbing headache, no sweating, which is contradictory, but once you get to a heat stroke level, that sweating system actually starts shutting down because you're conserving liquids rather than using those liquids to cool down. Your temperature can go above 103, red or hot skin, and rapid or shallow breathing, vomiting, and then confusion or loss of consciousness, and especially new confusion or loss of consciousness would be the things that I would keep an eye out for. Heat stroke is dangerous because it can cause that permanent damage to vital organs, including the brain. So we really want to, in the event of heat stroke, know what to do to prevent that. So we're going to start talking about that next. So for cramps, you want to stop that activity. You want to move to a cool place and gently stretch and massage that area. Sip an electrolyte drink. For the most part, you can treat it like a normal cramp, but you want to keep in mind that it is a heat-related illness, and that if you ignore it, you could be exposing yourself to further risk of heat exhaustion. Next. If it lasts for longer than 1 hour or the condition worsens with both cramps and exhaustion, then you will want to get medical help. So for exhaustion, a lot of the same processes. Move to a cool place, loosen your clothing to make sure that you are able to kind of exchange heat with the air. That's really the main thing that those tight clothes are going to prevent, is the heat exchange. You want to apply cool, wet towels to reduce your overall temperature, and then sip on an electrolyte drink. That's going to help your body to kind of restabilize and be able to sweat, especially, just to be able to remove some of those things from your body that are going to hold that heat. Next. And finally, in the event of a heat stroke, that's an emergency. That means that you call 911. You want to cool them down. You do not want to give them fluids. At this state, they're in an emergent medical need, and the doctors and folks that are going to be taking care of them from the medical point of view will be in charge of kind of reintroducing fluids and making sure that it's done in a way that's safe. Next. Pet safety during extreme heat, provide access to fresh water and shade, limit your pet's exercise, never leave a pet in the car, and leave the AC on at home. A lot of us have seen those dogs walking with the cute little mittens on their paws because the asphalt is so hot. I would recommend that as well if your dog is going to be out walking, because that asphalt can get really, really high temperature, and you want to be sure that you're also protecting the pads of their feet as well. Next. And then finally, preparing your home. So this is going to be ways that you can reduce the heat of your entire home. You want to cover those windows so that you aren't getting that blasting sunlight coming in and heating everything up. Install weather stripping. Use window reflectors to reflect heat back outside, like those things that we put up in our windshields when it's summer. Add insulation to prevent your AC from just going right outside through the walls. Use attic fans where relevant, and then install window air conditioners. If you don't have access to a window air conditioner, you can at least cover the window, and that way you aren't exposing yourself to as much heat as you would otherwise. Next. So that is our extreme heat presentation. There are other versions of this presentation that cover different disasters that we do have planned for coming up with Stow. So if you would like to tune in for further installations of this series, I'm sure that you can keep an eye out, and we'll be getting it to you the same way next time. So thank you so much.